Hi everyone and welcome to my Poisonous Concoction Occultist guide. This is a build I've played in Scourge League and it has worked out amazingly, and I wanted to make a guide for you guys because it's going to be a great starter, it's going to be a great mapper in particular, and it can definitely go through all the endgame content. If you haven't seen it, I have also cleared the Feared and also the Maven Deathless with this build. The total investment for this was around like 25 exalts or so, most of which is mostly spent in quality of life improvements and a bit of boss DPS improvements. But for the most part, this build doesn't really require much. You can definitely get started on just rare items, and you can, progress your way even soul self-harm with this build pretty well. I'm gonna show you just an example of a map here. This is some relatively juiced T60 map, and this is my character here that I have been playing. And I'm even gonna remove some of my gems here. So let's run this on a 4 link. So right now my Poisonous Concoction is a level 21. Then we have Unbound Ailment, Greater Volley, and Greater Multiple Projectiles. And like basically all of the rest of my endgame stuff. This is an Occultist, so we have the Undeath Explosions coming from Profane Bloom. So this is this effect here, which is extremely nice for map clear. So this alone will already carry most of the clear, together with Plague Bearer, which is a poison only ability where you can stack up a value from dealing poison damage, and then you can unleash that damage value around you as an AoE over time. So this is essentially the combination that you want to use to clear maps, and then on the boss you essentially spam your Poisonous Concoction. So as you can see here, I just have this Plague Bearer running, and you can see this little value here in the top left corner. This is where it stacks up. I think it goes up to like 1.4 million or so, and then it unleashes over time. And we can also Scourge here a little bit, and you see that basically everything just dies immediately without me really doing much while this Plague Bearer is active. So I don't actually really have to attack as long as I can see this value going down in the top left corner, as you can see there. So, and then you spend like a few attacks to get it up to like 1 million or so again, and you can infect again, and like this you can go back and forth between infecting, essentially just running around, basically kill everything around you easily. And this is the boss DPS here. You can see that stuff is still melting rather easily, and as I said, you can also go watch the other videos if you want to see the actual endgame boss fights. And this was done on the 4 link, obviously with rather endgame gear otherwise, but I have just removed literally like 2/3 of my damage here, and everything still melts like butter. So the total boss DPS that I have here in PoB, as you can see, is around 9.2 million with my character. This is on Cyrus, and with basically nothing really crazy checked, just the typical stuff that we'll have most of the time. And this is not even while focused. While focused, this goes up by another around 50% DPS, and you will usually deal damage while focused on bosses, because there is a very important focused craft mod that you can get that is actually very helpful. On top of that, this build is also quite tanky, so I have actually leveled this completely deathless from I think level 94 to 97 or something like that. I respec this character from my Burning Arrow Elementalist to this, and it has been a blast all the way through. And then I did a lot of bossing, and as I said, I did like some of the endgame encounters. I also tried simultaneous Feared, but it was pretty rough, but probably doable if you play it very well. And I have also cleared Simulacrum Wave 30 with this build. So while that wasn't really exactly very easy, it was definitely manageable. And at least going to something like Wave 25 plus is quite consistent once you play the setup properly. So in this video I'm gonna walk you through the setup and just show you what it's all about. There are 2 main variations of Poisonous Concoction. One is Occultist and one is Pathfinder. So what you need to know about that is that Pathfinder is generally more consistent. So you have the permanent flask uptime, and you are generally quite fast. You have high flask effectiveness for a Jade Flask, for a Quicksilver Flask, and these kind of things, which is quite nice. But I believe that especially the Profane Bloom Ascendancy node from Occultist is insanely strong and really carries the clear speed here. So I don't think you can beat this with Pathfinder. And while Pathfinder is probably a bit better for bossing, I believe that the boss damage, especially once you're a bit more optimized in the late game, is more than fine to just melt bosses rather quickly anyway. And I would rather prefer all this extra quality of life and the clear speed that you can gain from Occultist. There's also the Void Beacon, for example, that gives you 100% reduced life regeneration rate for nearby enemies, which is very useful for Maven encounters that you're gonna have pretty much all the time. They kind of get healed by the Maven. And you have other nice little perks like the Chaos Resistance, the Withered, and also the extra curse here that you get pretty much for free. This is what my endgame tree looks like. So it starts here in the Witch area, goes pretty much straight over to Shadow, and picks up lots of chaos damage, lots of life, and lots of mana restoration here. And we have more evasion stuff and path down to the ranger. And we also have some flask nodes here. So these are quite important because the way that Poison's Concoction works is that it removes charges from your life flask. And it also scales with the effectiveness of your flask. So the more life your life flask recovers, the stronger your Poison Concoction becomes, and this is actually a very important scaling mechanism. So what you want to do here is you want to have a saturated life flask, either an Eternal or a Divine life flask. Divine is actually slightly stronger, I believe, but it has a slower recovery. So I also used the life flask for actually healing sometimes, especially in boss fights. And while you could get slightly more DPS, I think it's like 2 or 3% more, using a Divine life flask, you are actually better off with this Eternal, in my opinion, because it just gives you a bit faster healing, which is quite important in some cases, and I didn't really care much about this tiny upgrade. In any case, you pick up lots of spell suppression from the tree and you try to get to 100%, including your items, so you have to stack that a bit on your items if you can. And there are also these poison nodes here that are quite important. So the poison stuff on the tree is very strong. Here is one cluster, then there's one cluster down here, and finally down here, and you definitely want to scale those because this is a poison build and you want to reach 100% poison chance. The poison masteries are also all super strong with the Plague Bearer maximum value, with poison duration, and you also have poison steal damage faster. So there is lots of really strong stuff. This build doesn't really require any like crazy cluster jewels. I only have one large cluster jewel that has 3 chaos nodes. So this is not super cheap, but also not super expensive. And worst case, you can just buy one that has only 2 of these mods, and it will be pretty cheap, I'm pretty sure. So this is just, you know, stuck in there to get a bit of extra damage. Overall, I gotta say this is an extremely well-rounded build that has very fast mapping, especially because you can skill charge around all the time. And if you have like a Quicksilver up, you can go really fast here, especially with some Onslaught on top of it. And then you have pretty solid boss damage. You have a few buttons to press. So the main thing here is the focus. So I mentioned that earlier. You have this Helm mod, which is a suffix, and you can get this from Unveiling. And this gives increased duration of ailments while focused, which is essentially something like a double damage multiplier or so. So this is very strong against bosses. So you want to make sure that when you encounter a boss, you press that button and then it will last for, I believe, 4 seconds, and then it recovers over 8 seconds. So you can use this for some nuke phases. And there's another thing that you want to do, which is the Withering Step. So this just straight up applies a few Withered stacks, which scales the chaos damage taken on a target. And you also continuously apply Withered stacks passively, being an occultist. So you can get to 15 stacks quite easily with just this and running around the boss. You can automate some of these abilities, especially Withering Step is something that people like to take on your left click, so it just automatically activates whenever you walk. Problem is that it reduces the recovery of your Flame Dash, which you also might want to use for mobility, especially on boss fights. This is quite handy to dodge abilities, but yeah, you can do that, or you can even put Steel Skin there if you want to automate Steel Skin. But I'm not a big fan of either of this, so I just have move only here and I press my Steel Skin manually. I always have full control over Flame Dash, and we can shield charge around, and we can use Withering Step on the bosses if you want. But this is mostly up to you. I think in particular in mapping, Withering Step on the left click is probably fine because you're mostly going to be shield charging, but when you do like endgame bosses, you probably don't want to do this to keep your Flame Dash ready at all times. Here's also another cooldown that you can use, Vile Grace. So we have Grace in this build, we actually reserve it, and that gives us lots of extra evasion. And we also have Vile Grace that you can activate for the suppressed spell damage dealt to you is unlucky buff, which is very nice, and also gives you 50% chance to evade attack hits, so even more evasion. So this is just like a great defensive cooldown, especially when you are spell suppression capped. and like this you are almost immortal, at least as long as you're not getting one-shot by some mega big hit, and you're gonna be fine. And I also have, for example, this other veiled mod here, increased damage with non-VAR skills during soul gain prevention. So again, I can actually have 2 damage cooldowns with the focus and the VAR Grace together, and that gives like another great damage bonus here. What I scale on most of the gear here is, first of all, I kept the resist, obviously. We get a lot of free chaos res from being an occultist, so this is great. And then we have lots of spell suppression, especially on the shield is a great source. You can get like 30 plus there with a bit of life, like a bit of res. So I bought something like this here. This was like 1 exalt or so. And it's a very solid shield. It has lots of evasion on top of it. And speaking of evasion, you want to make sure you have some evasion bases, because this will help you scale it higher. I have 21k evasion right now. This is without the Jade Flask. Here we go to 35k with the increased evasion effect. And this gives us lots of evasion chance, which is also helpful for the Ghost Dance keystone here. So you want to have lots of evasion for this and a bit of energy shield. So you can get that basically from like maybe an item or 2. For example, I have the Carcass Shack here, which is a great unique for this. And you can maybe try to get a bit of energy shield on your shield as well. And the great part about this keystone is that when you get hit by an attack that goes through your evasion, you instantly recover your energy shield, and this actually gives you insane amounts of tankiness, especially when you're not getting completely blasted by like 100 projectiles at once. But if a hit goes through sometimes, this actually gives you instant recovery, and you are much safer against most incoming damage. So you want to have a few hundred energy shields, similar to what I have, and you want to have high evasion rating and 100% spell suppression. There are spell suppression nodes on the tree that I also took, like this. And there's also some down here that I had earlier when I didn't have cap, but you definitely want to reach 100% spell suppression chance, and having close to 100% but not quite 100% spell suppression is gonna give you a very inconvenient amount of inconsistency that you want to avoid. So in my case, from items, I have 31% on the shield, I have 18% on the boots, and then we have a bunch here on the tree, and eventually you're gonna hit 100%. So it's definitely worth investing into this because it's very strong, and especially reaching that 100% threshold is gonna be valuable. On top of the Grace aura that I have mentioned, we also have a Defiance banner for even more evasion rating. This is a very cost efficient way of getting more. It's quite strong. We have also a low level precision, so I just stuck this in there to get a bit more accuracy rating, which is quite helpful. Scaling accuracy rating is a bit of a problem here, so you see that I have this on some items, like on the gloves. I think I also have it on a ring or something here. So you definitely want to make sure that you stack this up a bit, something like 500 to 1k accuracy rating on your items, plus a bit of precision will usually do the trick. If your chance to hit is very low, then you definitely want to scale a bit of accuracy rating from the tree as well. So there are some nodes, especially down here, as accuracy, for example, that you can take, maybe even with an accuracy mastery. One other great quality of life upgrade I have here is the mana cost reduction on the Elrion ring crafts. So you can see this here, the prefixes, and this helps you to just like spam all your buttons much more. So everything just costs, you know, almost no mana. I have 2 mana Steel Skin, 9 mana Flame Dash, 4 mana Plague Bearer, and then Poison Concoction is still at 31 mana like this. It just allows you to spam it more easily, especially when you're not hitting something, or when you have very low mana, like I have when I reserve all these things. And there are ways around this. So for example, you could remove precision entirely to get more mana, or you can, especially early on when you don't have much mana reservation efficiency, we have an Enlighten level 3 here, for example. You can also just drop one of the auras. I would suggest either Temporal Chains or even the Grace early on at least to get more mana, and you can maybe run even Clarity or so to deal with those mana issues until you can fix it. I do have this Clever Thief node here that gives me a leech for life and mana. We also have life and mana gain on hit. So this usually works as long as I hit enemies, but as you can see, if I throw like 4 or 5 times into nothing, then I will run out of mana. So you're gonna be a bit careful with this. For the Pantheon, I really like the Soul of Solaris. So this is helpful, especially against bosses, which is the main downfall of this build. So it gives you damage reduction there, it gives you a chance to avoid ailments, which is quite useful because this build is not kept for elemental ailment avoidance. so you gotta be a bit careful, and this is also why I have Sword of Garukan for the reduced shock effect here. So those are a nice combo here. You can change this around if you like, so there's nothing really like strongly recommended, I would say. Sword of Lava is also nice because it gives you life flask charges, especially early on. This might be useful, or when you run labs and these kind of things. And it also gives you increased life recovery from flasks when used on low life. So you can also run this to heal up very quickly, especially in boss fights. The flasks I'm running, as I mentioned earlier, is this Saturated Eternal Life Flask for this increased amount of recovered. So that you need to have this mod for scaling your poison concoction damage. Then we have a Doratus Elixir. I didn't really have much else to put there, and I liked the easy access to endurance and frenzy charges. The power is unfortunately useless here, but yeah, I like this just so it's quality of life, and I don't have to worry about getting those charges anywhere else. And I can have them on the boss fights as well for basically an extra cooldown. So I can press the Flask, the Focus, and the Wither, and potentially the Wild Grace, and I have lots of boss damage. I have the Jade Flask here. We have a Taste of Hate for damage reduction mostly, and also helps you a bit with Avoid, Chill, and Freeze. And we have the Quicksilver for movement speed. You can also see the full items that I was using on my character here, so everything is there. I also have a bunch of leveling trees for you guys, so in case you are just starting out of this, I made some like early game first lab tree here, and you can see like basically what you're taking. And here's a mid-level one for like around level 55 or so with the second lab, and then here's like campaign finished like level 70, and then we have like progressing to level 90 and the end game cluster, where you just change like a few points around to take like these extra nodes here. So in the end it is pretty straightforward, but you cannot start with Poisonous Concoction on a witch unless you do this as your second character. But if you're league starting with this, you will not be able to get Poisonous Concoction in Act 1, because this is only accessible to like Duelist, Shadow, Ranger, Scion, I think, and you have to do the quest in Act 3 in the library to get all the skills there, and then you can swap the Poison Concoction. I have a few notes written here just to help you out with the leveling, so you can refer to this here to give you a bit of pointers about the campaign. In general, you can start out as a witch with either Blight or Essence Drain or even Contagion, so you can do like this typical leveling setup there with chaos damage. So you try to maybe scale a bit of like spell damage here in like the first levels, and this would look like this here, and later on you unspec all this spell damage and have more points for the tree down here. So this can help you out in the early acts, and then after Act 3 you can already swap the Poisonous Concoction, and you can essentially go exactly for this endgame setup as soon as you unlock all those different skills, which you're gonna have by Act 4. Here are also a few pointers for skills that you want to use while leveling, so either Blight or Essence Drain or even a combo of them. So you also might want to look for ones that have chaos damage or even chaos skill gem levels early on, so that you can boost your damage a bit for the early acts. And then in Act 4 and on you can go Poisonous Concoction. You want to make sure that you scale the poison slowly, and then you also add all these extra projectiles with greater multiple projectiles and greater volley that you can get in Act 4. And then it's basically like a list of priority of sockets here. And then in the end game you want to have this setup. One neat thing about the GMP and the greater volley support gems is that you don't actually suffer the penalty of this less projectile damage. So in both cases you get less damage, but this does actually not apply to the dot effect that comes from the poison. So essentially you get extra projectiles, and these are massive damage multipliers, because instead of only one flask you throw 9 of them at the same time, and they can overlap to all deal damage at the same time, all apply the poison at the same time. So this is massive. This is insanely powerful, and this is also one of the reasons why this skill scales so well and works so well on the budget. Now there is one thing about the overlap, and that is you want to have a certain amount of increased area of effect. And the best source of that is the Carcass check. So you want to have a one that has at least 41% area of effect. And like this you get a nice overlap of essentially all of your Poisonous Concoctions on pretty much any target that is not like super tiny. And you can also see this here in the calculations. So there is this area of effect threshold calculator. So you can see the previous breakpoint is like -1% reduced AoE. And yeah, you want to hit either 21 or 22 yards radius here to ensure a good overlap. There are not really many sources of area of effect on the tree, especially nothing really nearby besides blast radius. So you can definitely take this early on and then try to get a carcass jack later. Carcass jack is usually rather cheap unique, so you shouldn't really have much trouble with it. But if you want to go for any other chest piece, then this might be an option. And that's also about it for what there is to say about this build in general. So you don't really have any crazy items, it's all mostly rare items, and then you have this carcass jack here maybe. And yeah, you want to stack evasion, you want to stack spell suppression, a tiny bit of energy shield, and then you want to make sure you have a big flask, and you want to scale maybe gem levels, you want to scale the extra poison duration, you want to scale maybe something like minus chaos rest to nearby enemies. So this is a helm that I crafted, for example, with fossils. And yeah, lots of life. So I stacked a lot of life here. You can see I have 6.4k, which is rather high, and this makes it really safe, and I have no trouble surviving basically even the biggest of hits. Overall, a great, well-rounded build that I can recommend. So hope you enjoyed this guide. As I said, here are the trees for early leveling, mid-game, etc. So you can just go check them out. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask away. I'll also be streaming, so I can talk about the build there if you like, and potentially might even play it again because I enjoyed it very much. I hope you liked this video, wish you a good start in the Archnemesis League, and see you guys next time.